Hi there, welcome to or welcome back to Tiff Reads Books, where I read books and I talk to you about them. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a novella series that I have started. And what I decided I'm going to do is talk about the first 3 books all in one video, because it's hard to talk about them individually without spoiling things, because they're just so short. So we're going to talk about the Wayward Children series. This is Every Heart a Doorway. I read the next 2 books as well, which is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. Down Among the Sticks and Bones and Beneath the Sugar Sky. So those are the first 3 books in this series, Every Heart a Doorway. I'm really excited to show you that I got this signed recently. Seanan McGuire / Mira Grant. She was at the Emerald City Comic-Con, and I was able to go to a couple panels where she was talking, meet her, get her to sign my book. Very excited. I picked this one to bring with me instead of hunting down a copy of Into the Drowning Deep, which I think I like better than this. But that's beside the point today. Today we're talking about this series. I've seen this a couple places listed as YA. I don't necessarily think it is YA, but it does have young protagonists. It could maybe be for older YA, like 16 and up, maybe. Because I guess there's a lot of swearing in these books. So I wouldn't give it to someone who isn't comfortable with their children reading language like that. My oldest nibbling, who is 17, has been allowed to swear since they were like 13, as long as they were around other family members who were okay with it. So if you have a family like that, maybe, but there is a lot of F-bombs in both of these books, all 3 of these books. There's a lot of F-bombs. So I wouldn't necessarily say in general, yes, YA. It just depends on your okayness with that. But yeah, so let me talk about each book individually. As a whole, this series really has me like gripped, and I am excited to continue it. I debated throwing my TBR out the window and just like consuming these books in a row. But we're gonna pace. We're gonna pace a little bit, but I will try and finish this by the end of the year. So Every Heart a Doorway is the introduction to this series, which I think is up to 10 books, I believe. I believe book 10 came out last year. I think there's a new one due this year. I will put it here if I discover how many books there are. I will list it here. Editing Tiff popping in here to say that there are currently 10 books. The 10th book came out in January of 2025, where I was thinking it was later this year that there was book 11 is because everyone was reading arcs last year of the one that came out in January of this year, so I got really confused with all of the arc reading. I think I thought Adrift and Currents Clean and Clear came out last year, but it actually came out this January. So there is another one that comes out January 2026, and that is Through Gates of Garnet and Gold. So I need to read 7 more books this year is where we're at. So I believe there's 10. Every Heart a Doorway introduces the Eleanor West Home for Wayward Children. And this home serves as a base for children who have left our world, gone through a portal, and then come back and had trouble adjusting. This is kind of like a boarding school. They do have academic classes, but they also spend a lot of time in group therapy, in individual therapy, dealing with the consequences of returning to a world where they don't feel like they fit in. Oh, the sun is doing a thing that is very bright. Because whenever the kids went through a portal into whatever world they went into, this was a world that was kind of, oh my goodness, can you see that? That is what I'm dealing with right now. That's a little bit better. Weird angle. But that sun is intense at the moment. So every time I try to come down here. So the children have gone through a portal into a world that called to them because it suited them. So the first book kind of introduces a few different worlds and this kind of scale of logic and nonsense. And we have some characters who went to worlds that were very high logic and some characters who went to worlds that were very high nonsense. And then in that case, there would be low logic. There are some other scales. They kind of have this like compass system where it's like a 4-quadrant map, and so you have like an X and Y kind of scale where you can fall on this. I don't remember the other 2, but we don't necessarily deal with them a whole lot in these books. We really talk about nonsense versus logic worlds a lot in these books. at least in the first book and then in the third book, because the first book, as I said, introduces the world. So we follow one specific character mainly because it's her introduction to the school. So that's our introduction to the school and all these other characters. We do a little bit of head hopping. We bounce between some different characters, but book one follows Nancy. And Nancy has just returned from a world that is kind of like an underworld. Well, it is like, it's kind of like an afterlife, like a Hades type world. But in this world, Nancy was able to be very still. And that is something that she really appreciates in life, is stillness and quietness. She hates the busy and the bustle and the hustle. She's also trying to get people in her life to understand that she is asexual and what that means for her. And her family has a very tough time dealing with this, and she ends up going into this world where she's just understood and she just fits in, and she can just spend all of her time being still. So still that she becomes like a statue, so still that she slows her breathing down where she is barely breathing, but she's still alive. And at one point, this world kicks her out until she is ready to come back, basically. It's kind of like a go out, experience the real world again, and make sure that this is what you want. And that happens to a lot of these children as they have experienced these other worlds, at least the ones that we're following, because they obviously came back into the world. So in this book, we actually get introduced to quite a few other characters as well. There's Cade, who is transgender, and his world had a big impact in that, where he was like a goblin prince, and when the world found out that he wasn't what they thought he was, they rejected him just like his parents. So he lives permanently with Eleanor, and I really appreciate Cade as a character in here. He's kind of taken on the role of older sibling to all of these children, and he's very easy for me to identify with in that role. And then we get introduced to Jack and Jill, who are twins, Jacqueline and Jillian, and they are back from a vampire werewolf world where one of them was the adopted daughter of the vampire king, and the other one was the hired assistant of the mad scientist, and the two would be opposed to each other. Both of them want to get back to this world. Jack is doing experiments to try and get back. Jill is just trying to like prove that she is the way that she needs to be so that the vampire king will take her back. And they kind of kick off the story by being suspected of a murder. That also brings us into Christopher, who was also in an underworld type world. Mariposa was the name of his world, and he fell in love with the skeleton princess or empress, I can't remember, and she basically saved him. It's kind of a spoiler for the third book where we get a little bit more of his story, but she basically saved him, and then he got kicked out as well, and then has this bone flute where he can call up the spirits of the dead. Then we have Sumi, who came from a very high nonsense world. Sumi is chaotic, erratic, she loves bright clashing colors, and she is kind of in a dream world of her own. And she is Nancy's roommate. And one morning, they discover Sumi has been murdered. And that is the storyline of this book. And I appreciated this a lot because I didn't know it was a murder mystery. I had been, like, every review I saw was like, oh, it's cozy, it's like comforting, it's really good, and it is all of that, but it is also a murder mystery, and it is very dark. We got children killing each other. And so we have this whole, like, murder gets kicked off, and we're trying to figure out why these kids were murdered, and who murdered them, who would do this in this house where they've all had these shared experiences and shared traumas, and they've all bonded to each other. Why would somebody start killing them? And this really affects Eleanor, who also made this school because she came out of a nonsense world herself. She was kicked out when she matured too much to tolerate the nonsense, and she's just waiting till she gets old enough that she can be nonsensical again. And that's really hard because she's like 90 something and she looks like she's like 60 something because of the way the nonsense world affected her aging because of how long she was in it. So that's the introduction to this. And if that sounds interesting to you, I would recommend reading the next books. Book 2 is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. This is my favorite of the 3 I've read so far. So the first book, Every Heart a Doorway, I read physically, and then Down Among the Sticks and Bones and Beneath the Sugar Sky, which is the third book, I read through audio, and I just finished them recently. So this is really fresh in my memory, where Every Heart a Doorway, I finished it in like November, December, I believe. So, and we're quite a few months away from that, but I still loved it. So in Down Among the Sticks and Bones, Seanan McGuire actually narrates the audio edition of this I am so sorry about that. We're just gonna have to roll with it. It's just been doing a thing lately. So she narrates it, and that means we really get a feel for the pacing and how the story should be told. And I thought she was a really good narrator. I actually slowed it down. I listened to it around 1.7. I normally listen to things around 2 because that just feels comfortable to my ears. But sometimes if I really like how a narrator speaks at a slower pace, I will slow it down. And I think 1.7, 1.75, somewhere around there was like, I think I was on the 1.7 end. Was really good at her voice. I think this would probably also sound good at 1.5 as well. But I am nosy and I need information fast. So I tend to speed things up a little bit for that reason too. It follows Jack and Jill. It's their backstory, which I thought was great. So now that we've been introduced to the two of them and we have this whole adventure with them in the first book and we get hints of what happened to them, now it's like, okay, now go experience their life. And I really liked that. Basically, the two girls were born to parents who wanted perfection. Each of them had an idea of what they expected their kids to be, and neither of them talked to each other about what their expectations were or what life after children would look like. So the girls were kind of stuck into this chaotic, oppressive household that was not chaotic in the sense of like everything was all over the place, but chaotic in the sense there was no communication and everyone was telling them different things, although it was very structured and very serious, and the girls were expected to be very specific things. They were raised by their grandmother until a certain age, and when one of them was really active, they were like, all right, that was Jill. Jill was like super active. They were like, all right, okay, here you go. You're gonna be into sports. And they cut her hair short and were like, all right, you're the sporty one. You're the son I never had kind of thing. And then Jacqueline was supposed to then be the girly one who wore the pretty dresses and was never allowed to be dirty, and all of these things that their parents put on them really caused them to have some anxieties about certain things and to have certain expectations for how they were to behave. And it's very interesting how that plays out in the book. So eventually they find this world, and it's very dark and it's very dreary, and they meet the vampire king and the mad scientist, and they have to choose who they want to go with. These stories are very diverse. We have diverse ethnicities, we have diverse gender identities, we have diverse sexualities, we have diverse lived experiences. And I really think Seanan McGuire does a great job of writing those things from a perspective that is easy to understand without feeling exploitative. And I think in this one, it's done very well. It feels very natural that Jack would have this relationship. Oh, please don't be glitching while I'm recording. I hope that comes out okay. Yes, it feels very natural that Jack would fall in love with this person that she fell in love with. It feels very natural that Jill would take the course of action that she took in the book that kind of brought everything down. And when you get to that point, it just feels so painful from listening to their story in the first book. And this one has been my favorite so far. This was like a high 5. This is probably in my top books of the year so far. Then, without spoiling anything, we get into the third book, which is Beneath the Sugar Sky. So this one actually, I said in my TBR for the month that this one actually has kind of a lower rating compared to the first two. And I don't think it kind of earns that lower rating. I gave it a 4, 4.5, I think a 4.5, somewhere around there. It's not my favorite, but I did actually really like it. So Beneath the Sugar Sky is about Sumi, but it's also not. It's about this new girl that comes to the school named Cora, and Cora is a bigger girl, and that is something that she experiences a lot of trauma about. She's always expecting people to judge her for her weight and for the way that she looks before they judge her about anything else. And as someone who didn't always have a bigger body and now has a bigger body, I can really identify with that, because the way people treat you is very, very different when you have changed into those two things. People tend to assume a lot of things about me differently than the things they used to assume about me when I was deep in my ED and not as big as I am now. So I really identified with that, and I think that made the story really good for me. But the thing about Cora is she is actually like this incredibly strong swimmer, and that meant that for her world, she was sucked into a mermaid world where she saved that world due to how strong of a swimmer she was, because she is a strong person, both physically and mentally in this story. She has a very strong constitution, and I really appreciated that. But she is sucked into this world through this adventure into Sumi's nonsense world, which is made very much of candy and sweets and baked goods. And so she goes in and she's like, oh, this is the world that everyone who bullied me in high school would have been like, oh, I bet this is your dream. And so of course she gets told that a couple of times by the villain in the story. And it's her kind of overcoming that and dealing with that. And I think it could feel heavy-handed for some people, and I think that's probably why. I haven't really looked at the reviews, but I think that's probably why it's a little lower, as it can maybe feel a little heavy-handed. But in this book, the plot is essentially that Sumi died too young and too soon, and it is affecting the future of her world. And so we need to fix it, we being the adventurers. So we get Cade and Christopher and Cora and Nadia, who was also introduced briefly in the first book. And Cora and Nadia have bonded over the fact that they both came from underwater worlds, and they end up going to visit Nancy at some point in this book throughout this plot to kind of fix Sumi's demise. And we get to re-interact with Nancy and see her in her world, in her element, which was kind of a nice little callback that I really appreciated. I really love ensemble casts and everything kind of like coming together where we have a main POV character, but we are getting some things from some other people. So we get a little bit more about what happened to Cade and a little bit more about what happened to Christopher. And Christopher's story is very tragic. I won't spoil either of those really. I've given you like the basis of them, but Christopher's story is much more tragic than I had thought it was originally, and I may have forgotten that part, but these stories all have like this kind of really dark current underneath them. And I think having read Seanan McGuire writing as Mira Grant, I haven't read like Middle Game or those ones, but having read this and that, it feels like that is just kind of Seanan McGuire. And having listened to her speak about things, that is just kind of Seanan McGuire. Like she just has this kind of undercurrent of a dark sense of humor, and kind of that's just how she views the world. And she's just a nice person to listen to talk. She is funny and has some really great ideas about things, and I need to read more of her books. So I don't want to completely spoil everything that happens in Beneath the Sugar Sky, but it is essentially a lot about coming to terms with who you are and not worrying so much about how other people view you, and dealing with that. We deal a lot with identity and our pasts and fat phobia, and I really like that. It's also about how who you are doesn't necessarily, who you are has a bigger impact on the world than what you look like. It's more about what you do than what you look like on the outside. And I really like that. It's a standard YA message, but I really enjoyed it from that aspect. The audio narrator wasn't Seanan McGuire. I can't remember who it was. I'll put their name up, but it was a really well done audiobook. So that's my review for the first 3. Overall, a solid, I would round it up to a 5 for the series so far is my review. Maybe as I do the next 3, I'll jump in here and do the next 3 reviews, because there are quite a few of these. And I did really enjoy it. So I'm looking forward to finishing this series. It will stay on my series tracker, which I am working on updating. And maybe when I get it like in a easy to use kind of mode, I will show you what I did with it, because I'm trying to figure out like the best way to like make my book tracker, my series tracker. So that is my review of the first 3 books in the Wayward Children series, starting with Every Hearted Doorway. I am so sorry. I can't control nature. She does what she does. I will see you soon with something else. If you like this, please give it a like. If you're still here, I really appreciate you for staying this long. And I'll talk to you soon with something else.